Hey everyone, I recently finished a couple new DS games, and I really enjoyed them. Now, I could be wrong, and I have seen people around who know about these games, but I have a feeling that both of them could easily end up not getting noticed by a lot of people. That's why I kind of want to spread the word about them a little. I don't really have the largest audience, but if I help even the tiniest amount of people find and enjoy one of these games, I'll be happy. Anyway, let's get down to business. For starters, I'll just try to say a small bit about each game before going more in-depth. First, there's Radiant Historia. This is a turn-based RPG with more of a focus on its story, gameplay, and music. I like the graphics personally, but they obviously were not a big focus, and you'll see that quickly. Age rating? I might have expected a T, but E10+ it is. Moving on, the second game is called 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. Like the previous game, story is a big factor, so I hope you don't mind reading. In fact, this game really is part visual novel. Whole lot of reading. Other than that, it's a point-and-click adventure game, or perhaps more accurately, an escape-the-room game. I enjoyed it more than any of those escape-the-room games I've personally seen online, though. Oh, and the age rating. M. Yeah, this game doesn't hold back with its gruesome descriptions of a few things, although they fortunately aren't as graphic with the images as they are with the text. Text paints a pretty grotesque picture all on its own, though. Oh, and one more thing. Swearing. Lots of it. If you're cool with all that, though, it's worth checking out. Now then, let's take a more in-depth look. First, I'll talk about Radiant Historia. However, if turn-based RPGs aren't your thing, but 999 sounds interesting, feel free to skip ahead. Discussion of that game will begin at about 14 minutes and 55 seconds into the video. Still here? Awesome. Radiant Historia is made by Atlas. Perhaps you've heard of them? I think they have a reputation both for making good games and for somehow remaining somewhat obscure despite that fact. Another prophilic thing about this game is the music artist, Yoko Shimomura. For those of you who don't know, she's someone with quite a bit of good video game music under her belt. Street Fighter II, Super Mario RPG, Parasite Eve, Legend of Mana, Mario and Luigi, and oh, the Kingdom Hearts series, just to name a few. I don't think you should be disappointed with the music. Actually, I'll see to it that you're hearing Radiant Historia's music right now, and all through the rest of my talking about it. Even better, I'll record it straight from my DS with a sound cable, just so you'll know this is exactly what you'll be hearing from the actual game. Now let's talk about the story, since that's a pretty important part of an RPG. If you're not already, be sure you're actually looking at the video from here on, because I'll be showing gameplay footage. Now, here's what the game has to say when you first turn it on. Sounds interesting. So the way this story goes is, the land is more or less slowly dying. Something called desertification is spreading, which wipes out all plant life and turns the landscape into sand, a desert. This naturally causes some conflict over what fertile land is left, and of course, if things continue this way, everybody's gonna die when the whole land's desertification is complete. The game's beginning shows a pair of beings that seem to have tried many times to manipulate history to prevent this, and failed each time. They set off to give it yet another try, hoping that this time the true history will be written. With that depressing start, we get shown a town called Alistel, where an agent of special intelligence is about to be given a critically important mission. This agent's name is Stock, and he's the character we'll be playing as. He's not exactly social, but he's not your typical brooding hero either. When it comes right down to it, he's just not a guy who talks a lot. He's very calm and quiet by nature, and I believe another character once even referred to him as shy. Beneath that, though, he really does care about people, and would sooner put himself in harm's way than let someone else be put in harm's way for him. But back on topic. The head of Special Intelligence, Heiss, is giving Stock a mission. A fellow agent has retrieved important intel about the enemy nation of Granorg. However, his situation has become dangerous, and Stock is tasked with meeting up with him on his way back home to ensure he makes it back in one piece. The enemy is advancing on the place they are to meet up, however, which means no matter how fast and careful they are, there's likely going to be some fighting against Granorg soldiers. Stock is given, for some reason, an old book called the White Chronicle, full of blank pages. This is supposed to be of some use on the mission. He is also assigned two subordinates, Marco and Rainey, both of whom are much more lively than he is. It is at this point that I'll stop going into as much detail so as to spoil as little as possible. The White Chronicle is more than it seems, of course, though. You can bet on that, and here we're going to get more into gameplay than story. The book will allow you to travel through time, basically. This game is all about how choices, both large and small, affect history. Many a time you will be given a choice that can lead you closer to the desired history, or just as easily net you a bad ending if you choose poorly. Furthermore, a choice early on in the game even leads to two totally different timelines. Luckily, from the world map or save points, you can always travel through time and space back to any important, let's say, historical checkpoints. Moments of significant importance, typically. Bouncing back and forth between the two timelines quickly becomes necessary. For example, in one timeline, you're supposed to meet another agent somewhere, but he never shows. Travel to the other timeline, where you meet the same agent elsewhere for different reasons, before coming up against another problem you can't get past. However, that meeting with the agent affected him in some way, even in the other timeline. And when you go back to that one, he'll actually show up this time. As you continue along in that one, you'll learn things that'll help with the problem you just had in the other timeline, and so on and so forth. Now, I mentioned earlier how choices during the game can lead to bad endings. Happily, bad endings happen right away on poor choices, and they do not mean game over. Stock will simply travel back so you can try again with the other choice. By the way, you can fast-forward text by holding the X button, or skip scenes entirely with the Start button, so none of this ever really gets too tedious, I think. Another helpful thing is that, from the menu, you can review a chart of history's course and the important events on it. You also use this screen when time traveling, and you can directly return to any of the points that are blue. In addition to side quests, completionists will actually want to get every bad ending, since they count towards your total number of events. Some of them are pretty interesting to see anyway. As for the game's final ending, there aren't really multiple endings. However, not to spoil anything, the ending is affected by certain things. And how happy or sad the ending is really can vary as a result. I'd say there's just one more thing to talk about, and it's plenty important. The battle system. First, encountering enemies. They're running around on the field and can be avoided. Let them catch you in the back, though, and they'll get preemptive and start out with extra turns. Attack them on the field, and there's a chance you'll knock them out. This can help you avoid them, but it's also handy in that you'll get the preemptive if you run into them while they're knocked out. Also, I don't recommend avoiding enemies too much. It'll just make the bosses harder after all, and this isn't one of those games where getting to the boss is typically harder than the boss itself. No. Bosses in this game are your real threat. Anyway, now to explain the actual combat system. It's typical turn-based combat with some not-so-typical twists to make it more interesting and strategical. On the top screen, you can see the turn order for your party characters and the enemies. But here's the interesting part. When it's your turn, you can actually mess with the turn order. Say you've got 3 characters ready to go. You can freely change what order they act in with no penalty. But wait, there's more! You can switch turns with an enemy. Doing so will cause the enemy to act immediately, but then away their turn will go. You can pile up your own party's turns. Of course, there is a price, and limits. First, changing turn order causes characters to go into Baroque status, in which they will take more damage when hit. This status goes away when they take an actual action, instead of just switching turns around. Secondly, as you can only see 10 turns, you will not be able to stockpile more than that, and you'll be forced to act at that point with no enemies to swap with. It's an interesting concept, really, and it factors into another one, the combo system. Multiple hits made against the same enemy will rack up into a combo level. As the level increases, so does the damage dealt. The combo ends when you attack a different enemy, or go through all the party's turns for the moment. Mixing up your attacks boosts the combo higher, such as a regular attack after a skill, or a magic skill after a physical skill. Depending on the highest combo you get in any given battle, you'll be given a boost to both your gold and experience, as if the extra damage wasn't incentive enough. It is because of that, however, that you need to keep something in mind. Since a combo ending early could cost you experience and money, they made sure that doesn't happen. All actions targeted on an enemy will hit it, even if it's already lost all its HP. So just be aware that if, say, one enemy has only 1 HP left, and you hastily target it with all characters, the other enemies left won't get hit at all that round. You'll just overkill the guy with 1 HP. Lastly, there's still one more important factor to combat. Enemies are laid out on a 3x3 grid, and they deal more damage in the front row than the middle, and of course deal more damage in the middle than the back. You can learn skills that will move them around on this grid, so you can push them back where they'll do less damage, for example. But that's far from the only use of these skills. Depending on the character, you may have skills to push an enemy back, pull them forward, knock them left, or knock them right. The real beauty of these skills is that when you knock one enemy into another enemy, the rest of the attacks planned for that round will hit them both. If you're powerful enough and up against weak enough enemies, it's entirely possible that you could get all the enemies on the field grouped up and take them out in one fell swoop. Indeed, dealing damage to multiple enemies is a very important tactic in battle. Many bosses even have multiple targets for you to take out. So there really is a lot to set combat apart from other turn-based games, and that makes it interesting. Don't think the game won't make you use these abilities to their fullest either. The game isn't very hard at first, but it does get more challenging, and you will die if you don't make the most out of the combat system. That or grind like crazy for experience points, but where's the fun in that? Well, I think that about covers everything. It's a good game, and I highly recommend it. If you want to see more of the game before deciding, take a look in the video description for a link to a playlist. I put together a playthrough of just part of the game, so you can get a look at it if you're trying to decide whether or not you want it. Be warned that it just ends on somewhat of a cliffhanger, and I don't recommend watching it all unless you're thinking of getting the game to play yourself. Well, I talked quite a bit about that game. Now let's talk about 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. Oh, but since this game is rated M and all, I guess from this point on, viewer discretion is advised, or something. This game was translated and published in the US by Axis Games, and they did a good job. It was written and made by Chunsoft, who have a couple other games I really enjoyed, like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky and Shurin the Wanderer. Those are RPG dungeon crawlers, though. Sometimes brutally hard ones at that. Very different and very off-topic, so let's get back on topic. They did a good job with the music in this game. I think it always sets the mood quite nicely, and some of it I could even see listening to outside of the game. Now let's talk about the story next. It's very well written, I think, and it's got some very interesting twists in it, as a good story should. It's also well written because a lot of dialogue is believable. They incorporate swear words into the mix, but they don't use it all the time either because it's edgy or some crap. Well, except for one character named Santa. He swears all the time, but he's got a temper, so it fits. That's another thing, this game has some really interesting characters, and I almost guarantee that, perhaps except for Junpei, they will all come to surprise you in some way. Junpei might even surprise you, actually. Now, let's explain the actual storyline and setting. You know, as with the last game, I'd say the first thing you see when you turn the game on is as good a place to start as any, so here's the intro for you. Neat, huh? Now on with some story explanation. The game begins showing a boat out at sea at night as a countdown begins. An explosion goes off and rocks the boat, waking up our protagonist, Junpei. Startled, he tumbles out of bed onto the floor and realizes that he has no idea where he is. Furthermore, he has a bracelet that he certainly wasn't wearing before, with a big LCD display of the number 5, a number which also happens to be painted onto the door of his room. Before he can really figure out what's going on, the window in his room cracks open as water pours out of it, beginning to fill his room. The door is locked with a mechanism, so he's gonna have to think if he wants to get out, which is where you, the player, come in for an escape the room segment. During the course of this segment, Junpei remembers the last thing he experienced before he ended up here. He had come back to his apartment at midnight, and noticed that the window was open. He didn't seem to remember leaving it open, but he shrugged it off and closed it. Then he could see that a figure was behind him. Someone in a suit and a gas mask. Before he could really react much, he collapsed onto the ground as a white gas filled the air of his apartment. The figure appeared to be speaking through a voice-changing device, and said to him that he would be participating in a game. The Nonary game. A game where he will put his life on the line. After completing the gameplay segment, a story segment begins. After Junpei escapes from his room, he soon runs into 8 other passengers on the ship, all of whom appear to have arrived under similar circumstances, and all of whom have a bracelet with a number from 1 to 9. Suddenly, a voice emerges out from a speaker in a corner of the ceiling, the same voice Junpei had heard that night in his apartment. The person introduces themselves as Zero, the captain of the ship, and goes on to say that he intends to have them participate in a game, even saying that some of them are familiar with the game. The rules of the game are explained. Now, this is a big thing with this game anyway, so let me just start by explaining digital roots. It's pretty simple, really. Let's say you add together 4 plus 6 plus 9. The answer would be 19. So you take the 1 and the 9 from 19, and you add them together to make 10. Then you take the 1 and the 0 and add them to make, well, 1. Now that you finally have a single-digit number, that is the digital root. So, as another example, the digital root of 14 would be 5. See how that works? The Nonary game works by everyone splitting into groups and going through doors that have a number on them from 1 to 9. No less than 3 people can go through a door, and no more than 5 people. Furthermore, if you take the bracelet numbers of everyone going through the door and add them together, the digital root should match the door's number. If not, they can't enter. One wins by finding a door marked with a 9 and escaping through it, before the boat is sunk under the water in 9 hours' time. Everything is controlled so that they will be safe and not drown until then. Oh, and of course, more puzzles await through each numbered door. What's not explained right away, though, is that anyone who does not follow the rules will pay with their life. It is discovered that bombs have been planted within them, so that they may be triggered upon breaking the rules. So right off the bat, here's some mysteries we already have. Who are all these people, and why were they chosen to take part in this? Why was Junpei, for that matter? Who among them are the ones that are supposedly familiar with this game? Who is Zero, and why are they hosting this game? All will of course be revealed in due time, but that's about all I can say without spoiling anything. Now let's talk about gameplay. You press A, and the text advances. No, but seriously, this game is a lot of reading. If you can't enjoy sitting still and reading a book, you will likely not enjoy this game. Of course, it is still a game, so there are actual segments where you're in control. Let's talk about those. This is a point-and-click, or I suppose tap in this case, game. You must escape the room you're in. You look around, examine things, pick things up, combine things, and interact with things in the room. Sometimes, of course, you need a specific item, shall we say, equipped, in order to interact with a certain object properly. Ultimately, it's very much a puzzle-like experience, and you certainly need to solve puzzles if you want to obtain certain items. Sometimes you must solve one to open the door, even after gathering all the proper items. Everything can be controlled with the touchscreen in this game, but there are some handy button shortcuts for your convenience. Left and right, and sometimes down arrows on the screen allow you to change the area of the room you're searching, but you can more easily just press left, right, or down on the control pad to get the same effect. Keep in mind some areas can only be reached by clicking, however. Or tapping. Whatever, I'm just gonna keep calling it clicking. There are somewhat rarely up arrows, but you need to click those. Why? Because you can cycle through your equipped item by pressing up on the control pad. That's more useful than having it be a shortcut for the few times you'll see an up arrow anyway. The L button is a shortcut to the item screen, where you can examine items more closely for hints, or combine items in order to progress. In the item screen, the X button is a shortcut for combining items. Also, while in the item screen, the R button is a shortcut for examining them more closely. But of course, you do have your own eyes, and once in a while you may have to use those instead of Junpei's. You can rotate a 3D image of the item around with the touchscreen to examine every angle of it. There are no shortcuts for that. You can cycle through the items by pressing up or down. When you're not in the item screen, the R button is a shortcut to your files. All the tutorial information is stored here, as well as some things you'll acquire in certain rooms that help you solve puzzles. Like, say you find a chart of some kind that you need to look at. It'll get put in your files. Finally, the Y button is a shortcut to a special calculator. It can be used to help you solve some math-related puzzles, and it's special in that it can also calculate digital roots for you. Even with that, though, there are some number-related puzzles that'll still make you think for sure. Oh, I shouldn't have said finally. There's also the Start button, which is where you can save your game. Huh? The X button outside of the item screen? A top-down view of the room you're in. Not that useful, but that's just my opinion. Now, although most gameplay takes place in rooms like that, there is a small amount of interactivity in story segments. You can press up to go back and look over text you already read. This is handy if you skip over something on accident. Also, you will sometimes be presented with choices, such as which door you want to go through. Everyone else is usually willing to work around your decision, and form teams that can both advance through different doors. The path you choose, and even just a few choices you can make within the rooms, will affect your ending. This game has quite a bit of replay value because there are 5 real endings, and 3 of them are bad. The odds are not in your favor. Furthermore, the absolute best ending can't be obtained until you've gotten the other, less good ending first. It'll cut off early with a to be continued, and that's sort of a 6th ending. Kinda mean, but there is good reason for it, and it'll make sense when you get to that. If you notice, there are 6 squares on the save screen. Never fear, completionists, that fake ending will be unlocked automatically if you get the whole true ending, even if you never get the fake ending first. Don't feel bad if you get a bad ending, though. It's quite easy to have happen, and really, you still learn things from it. If you gather all the bad endings, the bigger picture starts to unfold more and more, until a big twist is finally revealed in the good ending, while everything is revealed in the best ending. And actually, there's a path that will always lead to a bad ending, where you'll learn a bit of backstory that helps clarify something in the true ending. There's a part of the true ending just you wouldn't get as much if you hadn't seen that particular scene. So it's good to really see as much of the game as you can before you get the true ending anyway. Now, you may be worried about having to reread through all that dialogue again. Don't be, because this game contains an awesome feature. Hold right on the control pad and the game will rapidly run past text you've seen before. It'll even skip scenes, like that nifty Seek a Way Out animation. The best part is, it won't only stop at choices, it will immediately stop if you run into any new text. Even if you've seen the scene before, if the text has changed due to your actions, it won't skip it. So on replays of the game, fast forward text to your heart's content. You won't miss anything new. This even applies to dialogue within the rooms during gameplay segments. Oh, another helpful thing for replays. Any choices you have previously made will turn gray, which highlights for you what you haven't already tried. Nice, huh? Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier when explaining controls, during story segments, you can access a menu by pressing down on the control pad. You can save and put the game down even during story segments, which is a good thing, because they are lengthy. In my opinion, though, it's worth both the read and play. That's about all. As with Radiant Historia, look in the video description for a link to a 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors playlist. It shows off the game through the first 2 rooms, or rather 3, since I show both branches of the path. If you're considering getting the game, you can take a look at that to help you decide. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I do hope someone will check these out. Feel free to leave me a comment if you do, I'd appreciate it. Or speak up even if you've already enjoyed these games. Just try not to spoil anything. See ya!